Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Gold Silver Bitcoin Show, brought to you by GoldSilverBitcoin.com. We are more than honored to be sitting down today with Lyman Bishop, founder and CEO of Hoplite Armor. Thank you so much, Lyman, for joining us today.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So I want to kind of, for those who don't know, explain the industry you're in, what you're seeing in the industry you're in, whether you kind of categorize that as just armor generally, or maybe like armaments, etc. You're certainly adjacent to the gun industry. So I'm curious to hear about what you're seeing on the front there in those industries, and then also what Hoplite Armor does for those who don't know.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so in terms of the industry, I would really wrap up all of this under the same umbrella. I think most people do, whether it's body armor or firearms or ammunition, it's all really geared towards self-defense, right? So I would wrap that all up under one industry. I think we'll probably get into and discuss some length what I see in the industry, but first I'll give a little background as far as what I do and how I do it, why I do it. So this goes back to 2000. DARPA had a project called Exoskeletons for Human Performance Augmentation, EHPA. The goals of that project were 5 key elements to increase a soldier's carrying capacity, lethality, survivability, endurance, and I don't know, I forget the other one. Speed, lethality, carrying capacity, speed, and endurance. Okay, so, but as I went through that project, I really sort of ended up developing this exoskeleton system. And in looking at it, I thought, well, all this, powered elements within the system that they're looking to see are all fine and good, but what I've really got here is an armor system. And back in 2000, you can imagine the body armor industry, or more specifically advancements in personal protection, body armor in particular, we're really kind of in the early stages. So I was able to take the things I designed for this DARPA project and bring them into the industry, which quite honestly is historically a very closed industry. If you're not military or police, you're typically not getting in, but I was able to metaphorically, force my way through the door by way of bringing things to the table that none of these people had ever seen before. 3D designs, geometric configurations for armor systems beyond anything that they had currently developed. So that's really how I got started in it. It was quite honestly a very long and difficult process of partnering with the wrong people and doing nothing for very long periods of time. And, obviously it wasn't my primary source of income for a very long time. It was more of a personal interest and a goal, but it was something that I stayed focused on and worked very hard for probably 15 years before I ever got a dollar coming back in my direction. We can expand on that, but in essence, that's the answer to your question in simple terms. What I see in the industry, sadly, is blind obedience to the dollar. Very little in the way of principles. I have made it my everything to put principles before profit. Turning down opportunities because I didn't want certain people to have access to the things I'd created. Case in point, the ATF. I had an opportunity to work with London Bridge Technologies. They wanted to put together our plate carriers and work with us, and all that sounded fine until they told me they wanted to get it in the hands of the ATF and they could help sell it. But I wasn't having it because, first of all, I don't want to see my life's work used against the people. That's really the primary concern that I have with who I allow to have access to these things. But furthermore, the ATF was established solely for the purpose of infringing on the Second Amendment. Now, you or your viewers may not agree with that, but I can certainly back that up by way of simple logic, right? The Second Amendment spells out very clearly that our right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, yet you have the ATF literally kicking people's doors down over the length of a barrel or the rate of fire or the decibels produced, and in my opinion, that's unacceptable. And what I am really trying to do on a larger scale is to create social pressure whereby others in the industry follow my lead, follow my example, and begin to withhold these things from certain elements within our own government that are, in essence, bringing about our own demise by a tyranny. So that is really the focus of what I do. I sell armor to the American working man. You ever see Tommy Boy, right? You know, because that's who I am and that's who I care about, right? Zelensky or whatever the guy's name. I really take that to heart. I will not sell to departments or agencies simply out of principle, because I do not want to see these things used against the people.
I really want to get into a little bit more about principles in business because I was raised by a police officer. And so business acumen was not something that was really passed down. However,
Sure.
I guess because of a high risk tolerance, I kind of went the entrepreneurial route,
Mhm.
or at least do things for myself. Started out mostly as a freelancer is what it kind of looked out, but it's evolved to becoming, I view myself first and foremost as a businessman. So whilst I did not get very much education by way of business practices from my father, I did get other concepts such as principles, as well as an appreciation. And I was thinking about this today for the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, for
Mhm.
instance. So while I want to get into that, I want to kind of back up a bit and talk about kind of the 3D models and a little bit about the
Mhm.
technology, because I think that's what a lot of people are interested in and it might suck them in a
Sure.
little bit.
Mhm.
So can you kind of speak to the technology side of things?
Well, so initially, when putting these designs together, I used a 3D full body scan system. I forget the name of the outfit, but out in California, there's a company that does. They have a machine. You stand in it, and this scanner goes up and down, and it scans you three-dimensionally. In fact, the person that used it prior to me was Jim Carrey for one of the Mask movies. I don't know if there was a part two. It seemed like it was later than the first one. So that's kind of cool. It starts off by creating a digital scan of whoever's in the machine. So I use that as a reference to create the geometry for the different components. And I designed it around myself because I knew I'd be the one wearing it and testing it. So why not? From there, I use SolidWorks, which is really kind of the standard program that most people use with regards to 3D design, in particular with anything industrial. You've got other programs like CATIA that you might use to build a space shuttle or something to that effect, but I didn't need anything that complicated. And you've got others that are more simple. Oh gosh, the name of them escapes me. Um, it's on the tip of my tongue. But anyway, some of these programs are more geared towards creating things that are considerably more geometric, but the output of those programs is limited in terms of industrial applications. The file types that you can save out of them and utilize in different ways is somewhat specific. And so SolidWorks is a good general program to use for that sort of thing, typically used more in very basic geometry rather than organic geometric contours and things like that. But with the right techniques, it can be used in that sense as well. From there, we 3D print. And as a matter of fact, I've actually got some 3D prints sitting right here of new plates that I'm designing and developing. And I made these things simply because I don't want to spend $500 on each one. I make them thick enough that they'll hold the geometry that we need, but not so thick that it costs more than it should. So yeah, that's a common practice in my work, is to 3D print things before I spend the money to fabricate a tool or a mold. So that's a very useful technique. And in short, those are the key tools that I use to do this stuff. And really, at this point, I don't even need the full body scan. You get that once, and you're pretty well covered. From then you can modify things accordingly. But and these are the things that no one in the industry had been utilizing prior to, when I first started coming around. 2005, 2007 is when I was promoting these things excessively with different companies in the industry. Um, I think it's becoming a little more mainstream now, where a lot of companies might either have an employee that knows SolidWorks, or they outsource to someone that they've contracted to do these sorts of things for them. and you'll see it typically in very basic things like foam pads and plate carriers and things of that nature. But nonetheless, those are the key tools, and it is becoming more mainstream, which is good for everybody. But it certainly gave me an advantage early on.
Can you speak to the 3D printing industry in general and what you're seeing there, where you've seen it evolve from, for instance? It hasn't caught on. There's a set of technologies that I kind of, I guess, historically have seen as decentralizing, if you will, and 3D printing comes to mind. Certain iterations of blockchain technology, cryptocurrency, at least insofar as, at least philosophically, and popularly has caught on a lot. So Bitcoin, it's like promoted essentially in even I would say kind of mainstream productions, movies, particularly music as well. So can you kind of speak to 3D printing and how it's evolved since it first kind of popped up on the radar, and even perhaps where you see it's going?
Well, so in the early days of 3D printing, it was focused primarily on a process called SLA, stereolithography. And that's where a gel is contained in a vault and a laser solidifies some portion of it. The bed essentially would then drop down into the material and it would be built up layer by layer. As the bed moves down, it opens up the next layer for solidification. As time went on, things evolved a little bit. You have another process called FDM, fused deposition modeling, which is where a filament is melted and extruded along a given tool path. And it's essentially built up. You just have a stationary bed, and the extruder builds up layer by layer. The problem with that technique is that the material ends up with a grain, which visually is unappealing, but also creates a weak spot. So depending on what your application is, that might not really be the ideal solution. SLA, on the other hand, very clean parts, but brittle and expensive. There is another technique called SLS, Selective Laser Sintering, which is like what I showed you. Typically, it's a white nylon. And in this case, you'll have a vat of material, a powder, a laser will hit it, solidify the top layer, it'll screed another layer over top, and repeat the process until you have a built-up part. And that typically has the best tolerances, the best strength, and results in a part that's a little more usable. That's the sort of technology that you might expect to see on space shuttles in the future, right? This is one example that I've seen used for this technology that has, sort of a very boots on the ground kind of rubber meets the road approach, where rather than bring a bunch of tools into space, we bring the machine and we bring the raw materials. And if I need a 5/16 socket, we're just going to print it, right? If I need a wrench, we're just going to print it. Other techniques along those lines, more exotic, what they call DMLS, direct metal laser sintering, which essentially does the same thing, but with metal. And those parts are extremely strong, but also very expensive. So not something that you would typically see used, in everyday applications, but that might be more along the lines of what we would bring into space to form metal tools, workable tools that are a little bit more durable, say, than something made of plastic. And more you start to see in various industries where a part can be now designed and utilized that would have otherwise been impossible in the past, just due to various molding requirements. Perhaps you couldn't make that part outside of a 3D printing solution, but in this way we can fabricate parts and components that are significantly more complex and save time and money in every sense. And so I think long term, you're going to see 3D printing really open the doors to a lot of different industrial applications.
I've heard a gentleman who's a pilot and I think also works on the tech side of things in that industry talk about how much more efficient 3D printed airplanes would even be than the models we have today. Could you speak to the way in which 3D printing could transform everything, I guess, both technologically and culturally, even, and why that maybe gives you hope for the future?
Well, I don't know if a lot of things give me too much hope for the future, but that's a different conversation. I have seen where they are fabricating homes, with a process very similar to FDM, where they're essentially extruding a liquid cement into position, and this can make for rapid development of human housing. It's not always the prettiest, but it works and gets the job done. And you'll see more and more these things develop and evolve to where things are made better, cleaner, cheaper, faster. Um, I don't know what the limit of that will be, because typically most parts that you might fabricate that way are not going to have the same level of durability. Plastic, certainly that would be the case, but even with the metals, you're not getting the same, heat treatment and hardening, or various other attributes that you can uh, instill in metals through, standard processes. But it does open the doors to other opportunities, other ways of doing things. And it's more of a niche, in my opinion. It's great for prototyping. Do I see that really changing the way we do some other large scale things? Not so much, but what do I know? I mean, I could be wrong. People get all kinds of interesting ideas that evolve over time and take things in directions that you might not otherwise expect. But if you're looking for an opportunity financially, certainly the world of 3D printing is something you should be paying attention to.
That's very interesting. Could you speak to maybe the limits of it being like done by individuals? Because I think this is one of the big talking points on at least the internet forums, is the notion that individuals can order these 3D printing machines and
Mhm.
make things on their own. Could you speak
Yeah.
to those individually and where you've seen those come
Well,
and
I
go?
had a 3D printer at one time, many years back, 15 years probably. And it was an FDM machine, so it might be somewhat limited, but it was very useful and it was profitable. Before Hoplite, I made my living by doing contract engineering projects for various clients of mine. And oftentimes I would 3D print the parts for them. There are, however, a number of companies that perform that service. And over time, I finally sold the machine and just outsourced. The machines are cheaper. People are even able to put together their own custom solutions and things along those lines. And in the future, eventually, I think you will see basic design software and 3D printers on most home computer desktops, right? It's just that simple. I mean, I think the children of the future, um, they may well be able to order a toy that they want, push a button, and have it build up right on their desk. Right. I think that will be more and more common. People designing their own things. Um, everything from, a small, fix it solution at home to, um, high level industrial projects. But, again, within its own limitations. You're not probably going to be building skyscrapers using that technology, for instance.
What about like computer chips and microchips?
I can't speak to electronics. I'm a mechanical engineer, not an electrical one. I don't really foresee much in the way of 3D printed PC printed circuit boards, for instance. But that's just based on my limited understanding of how those things are fabricated today. My understanding, they're done layer by layer, and then there's a heating process that essentially fuses those layers together. I don't know that you're going to see much in the way of 3D printing, although, you know what, you very well could, quite honestly. I suppose it's possible with multiple heads, where you've got one thing printing the bed of each layer, and then, the circuitry could then be, um, a metal filament essentially could be utilized to begin to create those circuits potentially. Um, I do tend to see it more as a tool for engineers to prototype things, or for people to explore this technology privately. But looking back, right, the PC started as something where, oh, sure, I can use it for this and that. And I remember being a kid seeing little cartoon commercials talking about how you can organize your shopping list, or do a dozen mundane things a little bit easier. And we can see that certainly computers have evolved way beyond what anyone imagined. So it is certainly within the realm of possibility that 3D printing could likewise lead to similar developments that open doors that people perhaps never considered in the past.
So my last question on 3D printing is just essentially, what are some of the coolest prototypes that you've seen in 2021 in the 3D printing world?
Oh gosh, I don't do a whole lot of that anymore. I mean, probably the only 3D printed parts that I've held in 2021 are these, various plate samples that I've put together. I don't do much, if anything, in the way of contract engineering anymore. The only people I've helped out in the last couple of years were prior clients of mine that were there for me when I needed that kind of work. And, rather than send them off to somebody else, or leave them high and dry, I'll step in and help them. But very rarely do I do very, much of that anymore, honestly.
So principles in business. I'm curious to kind of hear about your story as having a business, winning certainly some battles like on Instagram, for instance, although I'm sure you've experienced limited reach in recent years. I know that you've obviously built that up at the right time and had a lot of success there, but also just more speaking to like the operational aspect of building a business, the challenges you faced, why you've learned to value like principles in business. One reason why I have, for instance, is because like ultimately we'll leave a legacy behind. And I want that legacy of mine to be one that's positive in every way that I can make it so. And that's why in business, it's not about, for me, trying to make money, because I think ultimately, well, for the reasons I've just explained, but also I think that by living virtuously and for legacy, I have a chance of making even more money than I would have otherwise.
Yeah,
Can you
that's a
speak to
good
that?
point. Yeah, and I think in the short term, having principles will cost you money. But you got the key word there, legacy, right? And that's one thing that I've always really tried to strive for. My son, for instance, he's 16 years old. He greatly admires the fact that I put principles above profit, and he's seen it in real life unfold numerous times, both with the ATF situation that I mentioned, and almost on a daily basis. I'll sometimes refuse orders because of where they want it to go. And some people think, oh, he's anti-police. Man, nothing is further from the truth. But there is 80,000 SWAT raids in the United States every year. To me, that's obnoxious. And I'll be damned if they're going to use my stuff to kick down the doors of American citizens, plain and simple. Um, so, and there are countless situations like the one that I've described where I've refused to do certain things because of principle. And legacy is that key word. In fact, one of the things I'm looking to move into as early as this spring is the development of fortress homes. And that really touches on a lot of what we're talking about. Because the idea is a home that is impossible or nearly impossible to break into. Reinforced concrete walls, ballistic doors and windows, heavy duty steel shutters, various other defense mechanisms. You can imagine why someone like me might want to build something like that, because I have a lot of enemies. I get death threats all the time. That's what happens when you're outspoken, especially in favor of the people. It's just a natural trend throughout history. So fine. But I also see a commercial application there to provide that same service to people who are so inclined. But on a long enough timeline, I do think that people notice that. Certainly, that's something that people have noticed with me. And I'll tell the story because I do try to inspire others to do the same thing. You don't have to be the typical business, dare I say, douchebag, right? I don't know any other word to really describe the true sense of what I'm trying to say. All too often, and it seems like it just feeds on itself, right? Where society at large seems to have this idea that making money is the pinnacle of human achievement. And I'm here to tell you it's not. I've made a fair amount of money. I've been successful in numerous businesses over the years. I don't ever need to work for anyone again. I don't ever need to make another dime if I don't want to. But, and certainly that could have happened a lot quicker if I would have done so without principles. But there's so much more in life beyond just making a dollar or material gain. Legacy is important. Instilling those virtuous ideas in your children is incredibly important. I think not just for your own personal legacy, but to help society, perhaps to see that there are other ways of going about doing things. And on a long enough timeline, people will recognize that. And then people will be drawn to that because, look, if I'm going to buy whatever it is, and I've got two choices, and one of them is some conglomerate that is just another corporation, right? Doing everything they can to maximize profitability. And another one is a business owner that demonstrates principles, that demonstrates some measure of virtue. I will, without question, pay more to give my business to the right people. And there are some things that I just flat out refuse to buy because I don't have options. So I think that's important, especially in an industry like mine that is so plagued by this mentality of the military industrial complex. You don't have to sell your soul to be successful. You don't have to abandon your principles to be successful or to have an impact. In fact, you may have a greater impact by demonstrating those virtues and by holding to your principles. And even if the people don't recognize it, or even if you don't succeed in so doing, I still think that it's a far greater thing to put your principles first and to have principles in the first place. So many of these people in my industry in particular demonstrate daily that they have neither principles nor the inclination to find them and put them first. So I would absolutely encourage people to take that to heart and to try to apply that into their lives, because I think it has application in any industry and in any time.
I think a lot of people are going to have to begin to do things on their own terms and building their own streams of income or legacies or both themselves for increasingly pressing reasons. So I'm curious if you could speak to some of the operational decisions you've made over your career that have, I guess, benefited you.
Well, operational decisions, I mean, now you're talking about how I do things and so on. I made the decision early on not to manufacture any of these things because it would have required millions of dollars. So I partnered with LTC, Leading Technology Composites. They're widely recognized as the world's largest and most respected body armor manufacturer. And I work with them. I design all manner of different plate configurations and solutions. What I like about them is that they have a team of engineers that is larger than all the other body armor companies combined. And that's really how I was able to get in with them. The founder of the company was an aerospace engineer. They have a very large team of mechanical engineers working for them. And me being one of very few mechanical engineers outside of LTC in this industry, and especially one that's designing and developing new and unique solutions, that gave me an open door with them. And primarily because it allows their engineers to work on things that they otherwise wouldn't have exposure to, and that broadens their understanding of their own industry and how to go about doing different things. And the more you can build on that knowledge base, on that expertise, the more doors it will open for you. Even if those doors don't come around for another 5 or 10 years, they're going to have that understanding to build on. Because a lot of what we've done, with these very contoured and highly ergonomic plate solutions is to really sort of push the limits of what these materials can do during fabrication. So that does certainly broaden their horizons and give them a greater level of expertise above and beyond anybody else out there.
So on social media, you've done very well. I'm curious, did you do that yourself?
I did, and I don't know that I've done very well. Sometimes it's two steps forward, one step back, because you'll say something that a lot of people like, but a few of them don't, right? So I'll pick up 100 followers and lose 50, whatever. I don't really care too much for social media or any of that, other than it gives me an opportunity and a platform to display those principles, to perhaps help enlighten people on regarding some of these political issues that they might otherwise not have an understanding of. And oddly enough, memes do a very good job of that, because you're able to summarize a point, condense it, and put it out there with an image that grabs people's attention and helps inform them as to whatever the issue may be. And having no experience in marketing, again, I'm an engineer. What do I know about marketing? But yes, I've done all of that just by way of trial and error. And sure, it's worked, and we've done well as a company. But what means more to me than any of that is the simple fact of what really happens at the end of the day. I am putting life-saving solutions in the hands of the people at a time when they may well need them. And that's what's most important to me.
Yeah, I want to get more into that. One last question on social media. So Parler, Gab, BitChute, Rumble, there's other platforms too, which are, I suppose, catering to a different audience than Twitter, Facebook, etc.
Right.
TikTok, Instagram. And so I'm curious, have you explored those platforms at all? And what do you think about them?
I did some stuff on Reddit, and me being who I am, I tend to be very blunt, and so I had some encounters with some people there that I thought were entertaining from my perspective, and also dissuaded me from a whole lot there. It's its own animal, and each one of these social media platforms seems to bring with it its own culture. I don't do anything with TikTok. Although, as I understand it, there is perhaps some element within there of people that are genuinely looking for good information and sharing solid information. My biggest concern is time. I just don't have a lot of time. And quite honestly, I'm trying to carve out for myself more personal time. It's winter up here. I want to do some snowboarding with my family. Come spring, I want to do more golfing. I'm more interested in those things, quite honestly, than some of these other business issues. I'll be pass the business off to my son here in the very near future, just so that I can focus on things like building fortress homes, or even running for office again, which is something that I don't seem to be able to go another day without somebody bringing it up, and I get it, because there are some real issues there that need to be solved. So I'm trying to leapfrog into other things, right? And as much as I love everything I've done there, I think my son and perhaps my daughter might be better suited to carry that forward, as opposed to myself.
Can you talk about the importance of like carving out personal time and like why you're valuing that? Because I think that at my age, that's something that is it's kind of actually nice, because I put myself in a position very early on in 2008, 2009, as I feared for what might come, and ultimately did, although on a longer timeline than I predicted, and began working at home back then. So I've kind of just been dialed into that mode since I was very young, in my early 20s. So it allows me to be home like all the
Sure.
time pretty much. And so that's
Yeah.
given me an opportunity to be with my family a lot more than I think would have
Right.
been possible in the past. So that's great. However, working from waking until like you go to bed at night also probably isn't the best idea. So can you kind of
Yeah.
speak to that?
Well, it can be all consuming, right? Running your own business, especially if you run it from home. The positive of that is that, like you say, you get more time with your family, because you may be in your office doing things, but they're just on the other side of the door. If there's an issue, you can help. If you want to sit down and have lunch with your family, you can do that. And I think in order to have a well-balanced life, especially as an entrepreneur, you need to have that time, that connection with your family. And for me, the personal time is really an opportunity for me to take a break mentally, because it can be difficult, when every waking moment is in some way involved with work. But by taking some personal time, and especially, some things perhaps more so than others. Golf for me is a good one, where a mind body type sport, and I can, do something good for my body, but also good for my mind. And it's in those times that, I'll maybe have good ideas about how to drive the business forward, or new products and things like that. You have to have a balance. I think that's very important. And, sure, it's great to make a million bucks a year or whatever. But what's at what cost, right? I think, again, there's so much more to life than money. And so to find that balance, and quite honestly, you're going to extend your lifetime as well by not pushing yourself so hard. You want a stroke or a heart attack, work every waking moment and see where that gets you. What does it profit a man to gain the world and lose his soul, right? There's a very important message there. So, but I do find that personal time, even if it's just sitting on the couch watching a movie, or doing anything, writing a document on a subject that I might enjoy, anything that allows my mind to other than that it wants to explore. I'm making a day, or how much money I make in a year. And quite honestly, I think it'll make you a better person, and certainly make you a better businessman, and in the end, more successful. Maybe not in the short term, just like principles. Short term, all right, you can make more gains by doing the opposite of what I'm saying. But long term, you'll find that it's going to be a much more sustainable lifestyle and much more successful. And you're going to be doing something good for your family and your community. And that's the legacy part. And to me, that's the most important thing.
Without a doubt, thinking long term, like thinking of business as a marathon, just gives you a broader perspective, and I think just better ideas in the context that everyone's thinking
Yeah,
they want, right?
you bet.
So now I want to speak about passing the business on to your children. Can you talk about the
Sure.
challenges in that?
Well, it's incremental. I can't take my son and hand him the keys and say, go, right? Because he's not ready for that. Um, and so it's got to be incremental. So, I'll give you an example. Last night, he helped me put together a meme, and it was the first one he'd ever done for Hoplite. And, it was funny because we were watching TV, and there was the Grinch, how the Grinch stole Christmas. And he made some comment that I don't even remember what he said, but I ended up saying, hey, how the Federal Reserve stole Christmas, right? So we took a snapshot of the Grinch cover, and we, crossed out, Grinch, and wrote Federal Reserve and stuck the logo over his head. And, I'd never actually done a meme where I dropped another picture on top of the picture. So, he stepped up, he laughed, he said, Dad, you don't even know how to meme. And I thought, great, good. Why don't you do it from now on? And so, that might be where I started. We were talking about that this morning. Look, you can do that. Start with that. Make some memes for the company. And I'd like to market that way, because in doing so, I can demonstrate my principles, right? It gives me an avenue to do that. And so, with him, it would start with, learning about some of the marketing. And, already he goes down to the warehouse with me, and, I show him how to process an order, print the label, pick and pack the parts, and, get everything ready for UPS, and, how to manage the warehouse and keep it clean and orderly and organized. From there, once he's got those two things dialed, I can step back a little bit and let him handle the day to day. But I'm still going to have to be there for him to coordinate with our CPA at the end of the year, or to make certain financial decisions as we approach the end of the year, and help him understand my thinking and my motives, and the pros and cons of every action. And so I imagine it'll take years before he's ready to take control of that, and I can go fishing and golfing and surfing and pretty much return back to being a 20-year-old kid, which is really what I think most of us strive for, right? So sadly, my body will not be anywhere near the same as it was when I was 20, but I'll take what I can get. So but that's how that's how you should do it, in my opinion, incrementally, in as much as they're ready. And everybody's an individual case. You look at the kid and you think, what are they good at? What are they capable of? And what can they be made capable of over time with the right guidance? And so that's essentially what we're beginning to do here in my house.
I think it makes a lot of sense, starting with social media and marketing and advertising, which is really what that is. And I think that increasingly that's essentially going to be well, that is where everything is at. And just most people haven't really caught up to that. I do a lot of work in the cryptocurrency industry, and I think that's a pretty progressive digital industry. And even they are really modeling a lot of what they do based on the 1990s models. So for instance, they're sponsoring stadiums, they're making commercials with A-listers. And that is just an absurd use of money based on what can be done today, where really the battles are going to be won online. And so like with the capital that they're throwing around, they would be able to make like a really impactful like series or anything that digitally, as long as they didn't get Matt Damon every time, for instance, or ever.
Right.
And really do way more damage than they're doing. So I think there's a lot to be won digitally, and then you learn a lot about people and your customer and your consumer. So like, for instance, like when you're posting, you're supposed to be kind of reading the comments and getting to know your consumer and what they want. I work in gold and silver and have since 2008, 2009. I went from that industry into the Bitcoin industry. And in the gold and silver industry, one thing I've learned is that all these people, for instance, an insight that I've gained from social media is that these individuals' interests align with those of the hunters and the fishermen, etc., the farmers as well.
They tend to be self-sufficient. Yes,
self-sufficient people in general. And that's like an insight that, for instance, none of my theoretical competitors, although I don't really view them as my competitors, don't know, is because all they're posting, for instance, is like just pictures of coins. Like here's another picture of a gold eagle, for instance. And so they're not really like experimenting. They're not learning about their consumer. Bitcoin crypto industry has the same issue. So you can learn so much about the consumer by spending a lot of time on social media. And I also think it's a kind of a no-brainer place to start in some ways. It's where everyone should get their start. Had I dedicated myself to this show and social media back when I was younger and was like, I don't want to do that stuff, rather than realizing the market was doing the thinking for me and I should just do what the market is doing and not kind of philosophize about it or rationalize not listening to the market, I would be much further along today. That aside, I'm curious, as we kind of wrap up here, I want to hear more about a couple things. So the Fortress homes, and then also I want to hear about kind of why, with gun sales always going up, it seems, should these people also consider armor such as yours?
Well, body armor and firearms go hand in hand. You cannot wield the firearm if you are injured. And it really serves to reason that if I am a gun enthusiast, firearms enthusiast, and I go to the gun range, there are safety concerns. And certainly it's a good idea, a good best practice to wear body armor when so doing. People say, train how you fight. Well, very good. If you're going to fight conceivably, if you see yourself in a situation where a fight is a potential, well, then determine how you might handle, act accordingly, train accordingly. So body armor is, in my opinion, a very necessary part of any firearm collection. Because these things are available to citizens, I think it's a very good idea for people to obtain this for themselves. There has already been legislation to try to prevent that. The Body Armor, Responsible Body Armor Act, I think they called it, Schumer and Pelosi were pushing this. Um, and they wanted to restrict civilian access to body armor, which to me is absurd, right? Because it literally only serves a defensive uh, capacity. There is literally no way to hurt somebody with it unless you just walk up and hit them on the head with it, and that's silly. Um, on a long enough timeline, they will make it illegal. Promise you. In my opinion, that is a violation of the Second Amendment as well, because by my understanding and my reading of the intent behind the Second Amendment, it wasn't just firearms, but it was armaments of all types, any of the tools of war or self-defense. That being the case, I think it's a very good idea to secure for yourself these things, knowing full well that on a long enough timeline, these people will push for that agenda. A good plate may only have a 5-year manufacturer's warranty, but it's going to perform according to specifications for decades. So what the plates you buy today will be good many years from now. And there will more than likely come a time in this country where you'll be very glad that you got it, especially if you have gold and silver, because there are people who will want to take those things. The other part of your question was again?
Oh, I'm really interested in hearing about the fortress home. Speaking of that topic, actually.
Oh, yeah. So I've got a couple different approaches for that. One is simply build one and move into it, honestly. That's kind of where the idea started. But more and more, I've been talking to different groups of people, investors and things of that nature that recognize the opportunity. In fact, I had a group of people here at my home the other day from California that I didn't even know they were coming to Montana. I got a phone call, said, "Hey, we're up here. Can we come visit you?" Okay, sure, come on by. I thought it would be a couple guys. It was half a dozen. So it was this entire group of developers and investors and attorneys that all worked together. And, they expressed to me their concerns about the world in general. The state of the economy, the future of the United States, the future of the world. They see things very much on a kind of downward trajectory, potential difficulties in the future. And certainly they want their families to live in a secure area. Montana is ideal for them, especially Northwest Montana. We're far enough away from most other things that we're pretty immune to it. Example being, when the COVID lockdowns happened, they didn't happen. And I think at one point, maybe some people tried and everybody just disregarded it. That's Montana for you. We're going to do what we want and deal with it. But the other part is, you want to talk about a legacy. What is a greater legacy than establishing for your family a secure facility in a secure location? But not only that, one that will literally stand for 1,000 years. If I build a home out of steel frame, concrete walls, ballistic doors and windows, everything I've described, apart from some minor maintenance, this thing is going to stand for hundreds of years, potentially even 1,000 years. Steel, glass, concrete don't really fall apart the way some other things do. And, so legacy, turns out was a big part of their thinking and what they really wanted. And so, my point to them was everything that you're looking for, financial opportunity, personal security and safety, legacy, not just financial, but something that's far greater than that, right? Imagine the world of the future 100 years from now. How dark and desperate might that be? But if your family finds themselves on a piece of property inside of a structure that protects them against that, believe me, you've established a legacy, and they'll be talking about you just about every other day. And that's, for me, that's what's really important. I want my family, future generations, to be blessed by the things that I do, even if they don't know my name. I don't care about that part so much, but I want them to be protected by way of the things that I do. What's the Bible say? A righteous man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. Well, we're talking exactly that. Something that even supersedes money. I can leave them $10 million in the bank, but if the dollar collapses, it's all gone. If I own a piece of property paid for free and clear, good luck taking it from them. I don't care who you are, especially a place like that. So, I really believe that that represents perhaps the best opportunity in today's market. I've looked at other opportunities too. I'm always looking at different business opportunities. One of the things that I'd really like to do, but I don't think I should, is to develop a driving range up in my area. The population's growing considerably. We have some of the best golf courses in the world. We've got a lot of golfers up here. I've even found a piece of land where I can literally build the world's longest driving range. I think the longest drive ever is 550 yards. I've got a piece of land that's 700 yards long by about 200 yards wide that I can put this on, with views of the lake and right in the heart of this growing population center. But my concern is, the future of the economy. I can talk myself into it pretty easy and say, well, these guys that play golf spend a couple $100 on the weekend. All right, if the economy takes a complete dive, they're not going to do that anymore, but they're probably going to want to keep their golf game up. So maybe they'll want to get in, and hit balls at my driving range. But at the same time, I think I just don't know if I'm ready to risk those kind of resources. If it were any time but now, if it were 5 years ago, I'm all in. Or any time prior to that, I'm all in. But I'm just not certain about the state of the. One thing that I do know is that Fortress Homes is the real estate market up here is absolutely breaking all kinds of records. I think we went up 15% last April. In 1 month, property values up here skyrocketed by 15%. Why is that? Because everybody wants to get out of harm's way, and they're looking at Montana as their best option, and they're right. They're right, because just about everywhere else in the country has vulnerabilities that Montana doesn't have. So I see the Fortress Home concept as something with a whole lot of potential. Even if the economy does take a dive, there's still going to be people that have a lot of net worth, access to resources, whatever they might be. And I don't think it's going to be terribly difficult to sell these things. And, my background is, well, when I was 20 years old, I started buying and selling real estate, gutting homes, rebuilding them. From there, I put my engineering degree to work and primarily in the ballistics industry. And I find it very interesting that the Fortress Home is essentially a culmination of everything I've ever done or learned in my life: real estate, ballistics, all of these things. It's really even connected to the things I've done politically, just by way of its association with Montana and individual freedom and liberty. So, in short, those are the positives that I see, and the opportunity that I see with the development of Fortress Homes. Now we can talk about details of these things if you want to, explore that a little bit and get a better idea of what it is exactly that I picture.
Do you have time for that? Because I got one more question, but I'm interested in that too. Last question is going to be about the American Redoubt, which is a concept you're familiar with.
Oh,
Perhaps?
yeah. Oh,
But
and that goes hand in hand with all this.
But first, I guess I personally am interested in kind of your vision for the Fortress Homes.
Well, real quick, I'll just tell you, in this meeting I had the other night, I mentioned verbatim the Great American Redoubt. And, that is, as you understand it, right? People voting with their feet, moving to locations like Montana in order to restore and preserve those most important principles associated with the American way of life, which is individual freedom, liberty, and protection under the law. So yes, the American Redoubt is a huge thing, and Montana, in my opinion, is the epicenter of all of that. Idaho certainly too, where you are. I don't know if you're aware of this, but where I live in Montana was originally supposed to be Idaho, but they drew the map in the wrong place. Did you know that? That's why Idaho's so skinny at the top. They screwed up on the map. Now, with regards to Fortress Homes, some very interesting things that I plan to do there. Number one, I really like strategically what was done with the Japanese castles, typically built on a hill and the defensive techniques that they used. I mean, essentially, it was a maze of death just to get to the front door. Well, I won't be going to that extent, but some of the things that I would include would be, let's say, for instance, an underground propane tank. That's a vulnerability. Let's put that out of harm's way. If we're talking about a neighborhood, we might be talking about shared external power, generators, wells, things of that nature, a shared infrastructure, so to speak. But there's other things that you can do in these individual structures, like safe rooms. The whole house is a safe house, right? The whole house is one big panic room, but you can have panic rooms within it, right? So in the event that someone is able to breach the perimeter and enter the home, well, you can retreat into another location within the home. Secret passages are something I think that every kid finds really interesting, right? Well, if I'm building a fortress home, you can bet there's going to be some secret passages, ways in and ways out. And I think that's just kind of fun and cool, but at the same time, makes a lot of sense, especially if you consider the potential direction that the world is going into. Lots of chaos, lots of trouble, lots of people fighting over limited resources. You want to be able to protect yourself and your resources. There's no other way to do it. People buy these decommissioned nuclear bombs, and that's cool. I almost bought one years ago myself, but in the end, a bunker is a tomb, right? You go in and you don't come out. You may live in there for a while before it becomes a tomb, but you're not leaving. So, there's that. Somebody likened a fortress home to a prison. Well, you're kind of right. But I'd rather be in a prison than a tomb. It's a little easier to leave a prison if I want to, especially if I make a way of escape, so to speak. There's other defensive techniques, in the ancient castles, they would have a wall, a perimeter wall looking at it from above, and there would be side would open up so an archer could stand here and shoot in this direction or vice versa. Well, things of that nature, defensive solutions within the design itself that are better suited to protecting it. Because it's one thing to have a fortress home that, okay, you come in with your battering ram, you're not getting in, but I'd like to prevent them from getting close. You build it on a hill, or even if it's flat ground and your basement's ground level and you build earth around it, you're adding to your defensive capabilities. Simple things like that. Tank stoppers inside of bushes that you don't see. Come trying to drive through. Guess what? You're not going to get through the bush because inside it is a big cross member of steel. All right. These are the things that I take interest in. And maybe it's a little extreme, sure, yeah, but okay, maybe I'm eccentric. Well, that no maybe about it, right? Certainly that is the case. But I enjoy these things, and that's part of my legacy because I don't know what the future holds. The world has seen its share of war and violence throughout our history. I'm going to do everything I can to protect myself and my family for generations to come, and so I try to think outside the box. I try to think of every contingency and all of that into play with these fortress homes. So honestly, the imagination, your limit is your imagination. And one thing I used to do for my clients when I would do contract engineering work, I would log them into my computer remotely and draw these things up as they watch in real time. That way they can direct my efforts. Hey, move this line out or move it in, or change the radius to this, and we can tweak these things in real time. One of the things I'd really like to do for people when I design and build these fortress homes is to either sit down with them or log them into my system remotely and begin to lay some of these things out for them in real time, just as part of the service of the custom build, whatever it might be. We take their basic blueprints, drop them into the computer, and now we can begin to build on it. We can add various other systems like underground infrastructure and tunnels and things of this nature, in a way that they can see and visualize 3D. In the past, we would build, little mock-ups of a building, to show people, essentially 3D print these things. And that's great. But, if we can do that digitally, oh, sorry about that. If we can do that digitally, it's quicker and just as effective. Because looking at a 3D image on my computer is no different than looking at a 3D printed physical object in front of you. The only difference is you can't reach out and touch it or pick it up. But it certainly serves the purpose as required to design and develop these things to anybody's particular standard. And I would encourage anybody that is listening to this and is interested in these things to contact me. And I'll be happy to have a conversation with you. And we're at the point now where we're trying to determine how we're going to move forward. One of the things I'd really like to do with this would be to build a fortress home neighborhood. And that's going to require a little bit more capital than I've got. That's what these guys came over to talk about. You know, a lot of them were very wealthy money guys. And I think in order to do this right, that's probably what we need. We need some people to come in with some real money, pick up 500 acres. What I picture for the ideal solution, because it's one thing to have your secured bunker or your little prison, as I referred to it, you know, your fortress home. But how much more so is your security enhanced if you're in a development surrounded by similar structures, similar like-minded people? And if we're going to do that, why don't we just bring luxury to the table, and let's make a private golf course, and let's make a shooting range and horse stables. Let's do it on the river where we can fish and raft. You know, until that day comes where we've got to fight to hold on to what we've got, let's have a good time, right? The personal time comes into play here. And for those guys that have the money to drop $3, $4, $5+ million on something like this, number one, you probably don't want to be off on a mountain by yourself. A little bit nicer if you've got a community. If my neighbor's a doctor, I like that. You know, my kid cuts himself. Hey, buddy, come over and stitch this thing up for me. Or, you know, let's imagine hey, my neighbor's a chef. Great. I love good food. Come on over. But then you've also got the service side of it. You've got people that work there to maintain the property. Collectively, you can make for a more comfortable way of life than you can individually. You know, and I really do believe that community is key to the future, to success in the future. Not just monetary success, but you know, what is monetary success really designed to? Improve your quality of life, right? That's really all it does. Well, you know, there's other ways to achieve that, and community is one of them. So I'd really very much like to see the development of these fortress home neighborhoods, starting here in Montana, but, you know, branching out into areas like Idaho or Wyoming or wherever people want to be. And to me, that's the pinnacle. That's the one thing I'd like to do before I retire. And it's not about the money I make. Really, quite honestly, I would do it if all I ended up with was a fortress home of my own. But you know, I always feel like whatever I do for work should be something that inspires me, should be something that interests me. I really believe that our work in life is a gift, or at least it can be and should be. And the only way it's going to be that is to do something that you love and enjoy, that inspires you, that pulls from the core of your being the best that you can bring to the table. And, you know, that's not going to happen doing something you don't like.
There's a movie called Blast from the Past. Have you seen it? Probably not.
I think so.
With Christopher Walken.
They went in the bunker and came out like 30 years later. Well, yeah.
Because he thought he thought that their nuclear war had started. So they were at a party in the 50s. They sent everyone home and they went down into their bunker, which basically wouldn't open for like many years until the year 1999. Right. So when they came out, the dad, Christopher Walken, was convinced that there had been a nuclear war and that the population just didn't know about it. Because, for instance, there were people that were like transgender, and he thought that they were like basically mutants. And then another thing at the end, so it was in the downtown LA is essentially where they had been. And then at the end of the movie, basically the son, Brendan Fraser, has to tell the dad that there was like no nuclear war really. And he told him the story about how the wall fell and how the Christopher Walken was like, so what happened? Like the communists just like gave up? And they're like, yeah. And he thinks it's hilarious that the communists had convinced the world that they had just given up. And that's where the movie ends. So the movie's the
so
first.
He didn't buy it.
No, he personally did not buy it. He thought it was hilarious that everyone thought that the communists had just given up and the wall had fallen.
Right.
He thought they were very clever. You clever commies. It's pretty much how the movie ends. And
Yeah.
so the first like 20 minutes or so of that film and the last 20 minutes of that film are really, really interesting. The middle is just like a romantic comedy, essentially, with some interesting elements. But I, I I heard somebody who's a very politically astute who does a talk show talking, and that movie had brought him some joy. So we have had the honor of sitting down today with Lyman Bishop, founder and CEO of Hoplite Armor. Thank you so much, Lyman, for joining us today.
You're welcome.
And thank you everyone for listening.